Hello, friends, and welcome back to Malicious Compliance Stories. We opened today's video with a baffling job interview that turned into a masterclass in red flags. Stick around for the drama, because this one's a wild ride. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with the turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. Accused over a parking spot. A few years ago, I was actively searching for a job, and after a long process, I finally got an interview for an office position. It was for a typical office job, filing, answering phones, setting appointments, everything I'd been hoping for. After working in retail and fast food for so long, I was looking forward to a more stable and professional environment, away from the chaos of customer service. The office building itself was nice, with large windows overlooking the parking lot. It was the kind of building where you could see the cars pulling in and parking. I parked my car in the lot, walked into the building, and noticed something strange. There was a car parked in the handicap space right in front of the office, and it looked exactly like mine. Same make, model, and color. It was nearly identical to my own vehicle. I thought it was odd, but didn't think too much of it. When I entered the office, I was greeted by the manager, who immediately gave me a strange, scowling look. His body language made me feel uneasy, but I tried to shake it off, assuming he was just nervous. He led me back to his office, and we sat down to begin the interview. From the very start, I could tell something was off. His tone was curt, and he seemed irritated, even though I had prepared thoroughly for the interview. As I answered his questions, I could sense that he wasn't pleased with my responses. I felt a little confused. Was I not saying the right things? What was going on? Then, out of nowhere, the manager asked, "Do you always park in handicapped spaces?" I was completely taken aback. "What do you mean?" I asked, genuinely confused. He went on a tirade about how entitled I was for parking in the handicapped spot at a potential place of employment. I was shocked. I responded, "I didn't park in a handicapped spot. I'm parked in the lot just like anyone else." But he wasn't having it. He insisted that he'd seen me pull into the lot and park directly in the handicap space. I felt myself getting more confused by the second. "No," I said again. "The car that I walked past in the handicap spot looks like mine, but I parked further down." The manager wasn't listening. He kept repeating that he saw me park in that spot and that I was lying. I kept trying to explain, but he just got angrier. I was beginning to realize this whole situation was getting absurd, and this wasn't the kind of workplace I wanted to be in. Then, as if the situation wasn't ridiculous enough, he said, "Prove it." That was the final straw. I was done. I had no intention of working for someone who acted so irrationally over something as trivial as a parking spot. I stood up, grabbed my purse, and pulled out my keys. I wasn't going to waste another minute on this. Without another word, I walked out of his office. I could hear him jogging after me, but I didn't stop. I wasn't interested in getting into a debate with someone who was set on being confrontational. As I walked to my car, I saw the car in the handicap spot again, and I walked past it without acknowledging him. When I reached my car, I unlocked it with my key fob and got inside. The manager caught up to me and asked, "Where are you going?" I didn't say anything. I just started the car, shifted into reverse, and drove out of the parking lot without even looking back. I could hear him shouting after me, but it didn't matter. I was already done with the whole situation. Driving away from the office, I felt a mix of relief and frustration. Relief because I'd removed myself from a clearly toxic situation, and frustration because of how completely unnecessary everything had been. A simple misunderstanding over a parking spot had escalated into a confrontation, and I realized I didn't want to be a part of a workplace where the manager was so petty and quick to judge. As I drove away, I felt proud of myself for standing up for what was right, even if it was just about a parking space. I wasn't going to let someone accuse me of something I didn't do. I also realized that if this was how the manager handled minor issues, it was probably a sign of how he would handle more serious situations. In the end, it was a small victory. I walked away from that interview knowing that I had made the right choice. No job, no matter how promising, was worth working for someone who treated potential employees with such disrespect. Accusing someone of lying without verifying facts first? Red flag central. And our next story. Say goodbye to the fence. I once owned a home that had previously been rented out, and the former tenant had put up a quick makeshift chain link fence for his dog. The corners of the fence were right at the edge of the house, nothing fancy, just enough to get the job done. I didn't have a dog myself, so whether there was a fence or not didn't really matter to me. It was one of those things I never paid much attention to, as it served its basic purpose. The day I moved in, however, my neighbor came over with an interesting request. She ran a daycare out of her house. That was a whole other nightmare, trust me. And she asked if she could put up a fence for her daycare kids. Her idea was to save some money by tying into my existing fence instead of building one entirely of her own. She explained that she could avoid the cost of fencing an entire side of her property if she just attached her new fence to mine. Now, I may have been younger, but I wasn't naive. I knew exactly what this meant. If they tied into my fence, they would essentially be claiming ownership over a portion of the property between our houses. While the area in question wasn't huge, maybe 15 feet at most, it still meant that they could end up owning that space after a certain number of years just by maintaining it. This would include everything up to the edge of my house, and even my air conditioning unit would technically be on their property. That was a non-starter for me. I politely but firmly told her that no, they couldn't tie into my fence, not now or ever. I explained the long-term implications and the potential for problems down the road. It was a simple no, and I thought that would be the end of it. But I mentioned the interaction to my realtor just to give her a heads up, and she about threw a fit. It turns out this neighbor had approached her with the same request before, and she had also told her no. It seemed like this was a repeated issue, and my realtor wasn't exactly thrilled that the neighbor kept pushing the same thing. At first, I thought this was just a one-off attempt to get what she wanted, but I quickly learned it wasn't. Over the next few years, she would occasionally bring it up again, asking if I'd changed my mind. Each time, I firmly said no. Eventually, even the husband got involved, maybe trying to intimidate me since I was a single woman living there, but that didn't work either. I still said no, every single time. To make sure there was no misunderstanding, I did my homework. I went online and got a copy of the official property line map that showed the exact boundaries of my property. I wanted to be absolutely sure I knew where I stood, and I kept that map on hand just in case. I wasn't about to let anyone claim even an inch of my property. So a few years went by with me constantly rejecting her requests. Then one day I saw something in her backyard that caught my eye. There was a whole bunch of chain link fencing piled up, but there wasn't nearly enough to fence in the entire area they needed. My suspicion was confirmed. They were going to try and tie into my fence anyway, despite everything I'd said to them over the years. I wasn't having any of it. That night I decided enough was enough. I took down the entire fence, rolling it up and digging out every single fence post. I wasn't going to let them just take over what was rightfully mine. I made sure they couldn't claim a single inch of that fence, no matter how hard they tried. The next morning, the neighbor was in for a surprise. She came outside to find that the fence was gone, leaving her daycare kids with more ways to escape into the open yard. I'm sure it was a bit of a headache for her, as she now had to deal with the consequences of her actions. The kid she was supposed to be watching had more freedom to roam around, and I'm sure it wasn't the most pleasant situation for her. But that wasn't the only problem. They also had to scramble to order more chain link fencing and posts to replace what they had lost. Of course, that took time, and I'm sure it was frustrating for them, especially when they realized they had no choice but to buy new materials and get the job done right. When I eventually decided to sell the house, I made sure to pass on a little care package to the new owner, a single man. I included the property line map with a note explaining the situation and advising him to keep a close eye on the neighbors. I didn't want him to be blindsided like I had been. I also made sure my realtor, who, by the way, was still the same one I loved so much, knew the whole story. She was fully in the loop and made sure the new owner understood everything before he moved in. She gave him a full rundown of the situation so he knew exactly what he was getting into. I think the funniest part of all this was how unnecessary it all was. If the neighbor had just accepted my no when I first said it, she could have avoided all this drama. Instead, she kept pushing, thinking she could outlast me or wear me down. But that backfired. I wasn't about to let her take what wasn't hers, and she learned the hard way. I'll admit it did feel good to stand my ground and put my foot down when she repeatedly tried to take advantage of me. The new owner of the house never had any issues with the neighbors, thankfully. I suspect the neighbor learned her lesson after everything that went down. I'm sure she realized that trying to push her way into someone else's property wasn't going to work. But in the end, it was a win for me, both in terms of standing up for my rights and in making sure the new owner was fully aware of what they were dealing with. So if there's one lesson I take from all this, it's that sometimes it's better to stick to your guns and say no. And when people keep pushing, it's important to be prepared to defend what's rightfully yours. Because in the end, no one should be allowed to take what isn't theirs, no matter how much they try to convince you otherwise. And our last story. Grandpa's not who you think he is, Karen. Here's a story about my father and brother told from the perspective of my father to make it clearer. I slowly climbed the stairs to the second floor of the office building, clutching a folder filled with invoices and receipts. Beside me walked my 6-year-old grandson, Max, cheerfully murmuring something to himself. "Grandpa, when will Dad arrive?" he asked, holding on to my hand. "Soon, Max, soon," I reassured him gently. "We just need to drop off these documents, then we'll go." I was familiar with the company's office, often stopping by for various matters, but today I noticed someone new at the reception, a woman around 40 with an unmistakably displeased expression. "Good afternoon," I greeted her with a smile. "I've brought some documents. I was instructed to deliver them here." The woman coldly glanced down at me and sharply interrupted, "And who are you exactly? This isn't a retirement home." Momentarily stunned by such a reception, I still calmly replied, "I'm sorry, but I was told to deliver these important documents here." "I don't know who told you what, old man, but don't put anything here. This is my desk, not a place for your trash," she snapped. Little Max pressed against my leg and softly asked, "Grandpa, why is this lady so angry?" "Because your grandpa doesn't understand where he is," she interrupted again, raising her voice even more upon noticing Max. "And it's forbidden to bring children here. Do you think this is a kindergarten?" "Excuse me, ma'am," I began losing my patience, "but don't you think you're being unnecessarily rude? I'm simply carrying out your management's request." "Management?" she laughed bitterly. "I am the management here. If you don't like something, I'll call security, and they'll quickly throw you out. You're interfering with my work." I was stunned by this entirely unexpected aggression, feeling a bit lost, but just as I was about to respond to Karen, the door opened and my son, Jog, stepped into the office. Seeing his father, Max immediately shouted, "Dad, you're finally here." Jog scanned the room in surprise, sensing the tension, and approached me with Max in his arms. "Is everything okay, Dad?" "Well, I brought these documents, but this lady insists I've made a mistake," I replied calmly. The woman's face changed instantly. She turned pale, frozen in place, eyes wide open, staring first at me, then at the owner of the company. Jog gave the office manager a stern look. "Karen, I see you've already met my father and son. By the way, the documents he brought are very important and specifically intended for you." Karen stammered awkwardly, attempting to justify herself. I didn't know he was your father. I thought he was some stranger." "Does that matter?" Jog's voice remained calm, but was cold and sharp. "Respect is the top priority in our company. If you can't understand that, you don't belong here." The following day, Karen was no longer at work. Rumors circulated that she hadn't even requested a recommendation. She simply vanished as if she'd never been there. "You see, Max," I told my grandson when we returned to the office, "it's always important to remain polite and not offend others because life quickly returns rudeness back to the sender." Clearly, this Karen had run away from some managerial position at an HOA. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.